Hey guys, welcome back to Evike Tech Corner. Today I'm going to show you how to clean and lubricate your Sig series. I'm going to first start by removing the magazine and performing a basic field strip. Once you have all your components out, take a soft cloth and wipe out all of the internals and get into the grooves and the tracks that your slide will actually travel on. And then depending how bad it is, you might even want to get an air duster into a couple of the tight spots and blow out some of the dirt. This one's not that kind of dirt, it just looks like it's been used a lot. So once you have it nice and clean, I'm going to set this guy to the side for now, and you want to move to your inner barrel. Take your standard AEG unjamming rod. You can also use a Q-tip and spray a little bit of silicone oil onto the cloth. And we'll just give it a nice clean. And once you're done with that, we'll go ahead and make one more pass. Let's make that quick pass, get the lubrication out that might be in there, any excess dirt. Alright, this guy's good to go. Now take your silicone oil and very lightly, you don't want to get into the inner barrel again, just very lightly spray the top of the bucking around the edge. This is going to make sure that it's not dry or going to dry out in log storage or anything like that. And again, just take your unjamming rod and get in the outer barrel and get any dirt or debris that could be in there. And just wipe out the hop-up cavity here. And once that's good, you can go ahead and reinstall the inner barrel into the outer barrel. Move on to your spring guide. Take your spring off and give the spring guide a good wipe down, get off any old lubrications or dirt, and then give it a very light coating of silicone oil and reinstall the spring. And what you can do now is we're going to lubricate and clean the blowback unit and the rails. What I like to use is actually the 100% silicone drops for this portion. It's a little thicker and it has less tendency of spreading and spraying all over the place where you don't want it. So on the air nozzle, that square hole, just put a drop or two in there. And once that's in there, just go ahead and move the air nozzle forward and back, and what you're doing is pushing that grease throughout the valve network in there. Once you got that, go ahead and pull the air nozzle back, and it's going to reveal your piston head. Just put a single drop on the O-ring there and let it spread throughout it, so you might have to hold it here for a few seconds. Okay, and once you think it's thoroughly spread through it, again just move the air nozzle and push it all around in there. Okay, now I'll grab my silicone spray again. And on the sides here, there's actually springs with a track, and you want to get in there and get this and spray those. The reason I use the spray is because I have the little tip. It's really hard to get in there with the drops. Okay, and as I did before, just move the air nozzle. Make sure that this is retracting like this. So if you pull this forward and let go and it doesn't slap back or is stuttery, you're going to have to take apart your blowback unit and really get in there and clean everything out and make sure that something is not misaligned, broken, or just worn out. What we'll do is on the back, you actually have the striker. I like to push it in just a little bit. And take your silicone drops again. And just put a very small touch of silicone oil in there. And just actuate the striker. Okay. Now we're going to move to the slide. You can use the drops or the spray on this. I like to use the drops so again it doesn't spray all over the side of the piston, but sometimes the drops will have a tendency of over lubricating, so you can actually get a buildup of a thin layer of dirt. So it's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and use the drops. Just use a fine amount. You don't need too much on the inside of the slide. And then if you start seeing wear spots, such as this one has that wear mark here, and then a little bit up top here it's starting to wear, I'm going to show you a grease that we use to prevent some of that excessive wear. Okay, so I got my rails all set up, and then this lithium grease is a little bit thicker than the silicone oil, so you don't need a whole bunch. You just want a very, very little bit, just a touch of it. And what you're going to want to do is rub it onto those high wear spots. This lithium grease will protect the slide and whatever portion on the lower receiver is also rubbing on that. And then also do where the outer barrel has been rubbing, just very lightly. You don't need it all over the inside, so just wipe it down in there, and if you get too much, make sure that you do clean it out. Don't leave excessive grease in there. You're just giving dirt and dust a place to collect. So it's very lightly greased, you can see in there. You don't want it just globs of grease everywhere. It's going to be really bad for the piston. Now that you have the slide nice and lubricated and cleaned out, let's go ahead and rebuild it. Alright, sorry about that guys, I had a little bit of trouble there. So now that we've got this back together, we can set that to the side for now, and we're going to move to the lower receiver. Now depending on how bad or how dirty the lower receiver is, you might want to get an air duster to really clean these out, or even completely disassemble the lower portion and soak the mechanical parts in a simple green compound to actually break down the old dirt and grease. This one's not too bad, so we're going to give it a wipe down. And while we're in here, we're going to inspect for any broken or worn parts that is a possibility that might need to be replaced. I'm just wiping down all the rails. You want to get all the flat surfaces and into the crevices if all possible. And I'm pulling the trigger now, and it's going to move the trigger bar forward so you can get behind it. Okay. This one looks pretty good. It's not too bad. We're going to now move on to lubrication. I like to pull the hammer back, and there is a pivot point in here. Just very lightly spray inside of there. And then you pull the hammer, and it's going to reveal the little slot here. Inside of there is the hammer spring. So just a little bit in there, and then you can actuate it, make sure that the lubrication is pushing throughout the spring and the hammer back here. Next we'll move to the trigger bar. Use very little silicone here. You don't want a whole bunch, because if this gets bound up, your gun is not going to work properly. So you don't want a lot of lubricant there, because this is open when the slide's put together. This portion will collect a lot of dirt. Okay, and again, we're going to come down to the front, pull the trigger back, and there's a couple moving parts in here. You want to get all the area that they move on, and including the trigger spring down here. And like I did before, I'm going to go ahead and actuate the trigger and get the lubricant throughout it. Okay. Now, one thing I am seeing in here is that this slide catch is very warm. So this pistol is hitting quite hard on the slide catch. Now, there's not much you can do about that, but since the wear is pretty prominent, I'm going to add some lithium grease to it. And just like I did when I was on the slide, you don't want a whole bunch, just a very, very little bit. And most of this is getting wiped off. I'm not going to use all that. Let's see, I still got a decent amount left. And all that's going to do is try to reduce some of the friction and wear that's going on there. Most of that's actually impact from the slide being racked back and hitting, but I can see some of it is actual wear from the slide catch. So we want to prevent that if all possible. Once you have all this set up, you can go ahead and reinstall the slide. Now, you don't really need too much lube on the rails. I lubricated the rails on the inside. There's really no point of doing both because you're just going to over lubricate. The rails here isn't going to be enough lubrication to protect the rails on the lower receiver. Okay. Once you have that set up, just go ahead and put the slide back on, and we're going to check all the functions and features and rack the slide a bunch of times. If there's any excess of lubrication, it's going to force it out. And you want it to force out while you're in your shop or a clean area instead of on the field where it's going to collect dirt. So, feels fine to me. I do have a little bit of excess coming out the top, and that's good. We want to get that now. Okay. And it looks good to go. So now that we finished the pistol, we're going to move on to something that people always forget. The magazine. This is very important. This is decently expensive, and these valves are sometimes, yeah, they're replaceable, but they're expensive to replace. I'll show you guys how to do that right now. First, start by pushing in the valve away from your face to make sure that there's no gas in the magazine. There is none in mine. So I'm going to keep the valve pressed down, grab my silicone drops or the spray. Again, the spray is a little messier, so the drops are easy. And just put a single drop inside with the valve compressed. Okay. And then actuate the valve. And what you're doing is when you push this valve in, there's a little post down here with an O-ring on it. And you want to get the lubrication on that. And then you can use your thumb. I'm just doing this so you guys can see. Push in the valve again and then put a single drop on top of the valve and hold it down for a few seconds. What you're going to do is let it seep in and get into the main O-ring inside of that valve. Okay, and once you let it sit there for a little bit, just actuate the valve. Make sure that the lubricant is all the way around the valve. Okay. Then we'll move to the fill valve. Use a silicone spray for this, it's fine. And you just want to put a little bit on there. And then what I like to do is get a can of green gas and put a shot real quick inside. Inside that little valve is a tiny little spring that sits on the little fill valve post there. And if that gets dry, it's going to jam open or close. So it's either going to leak or you won't be able to fill it with gas. So by filling it with gas just now with the silicone oil in there, it lubricated that valve. And then we'll go ahead and purge this, make sure it's empty, and that's it. You got it all set up. And then for long time storage, if you're going to store it for say a week or so, just make sure you do put a quick shot of gas in there. That's it. Thanks for watching.